Hello, I am Dr. Ryan Alcantara with USC Rossier Career Services, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to Career Pivots, lessons from Rossier alumni who have charted new courses. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Dr. Jeff Gold, who is now the founder and CEO of Insights to Action, but whose career journey has included serving as a public school teacher and leader in higher education. And I'll share more about Jeff in a moment, but first, let me introduce Isabel Wright, the other half of Rossier Career Services team, who will help manage the chat and the Q&A portion of our program. Isabel.
Thanks, Ryan. Welcome, everyone. I'm Isabel Wright. I'm the Career Services Specialist here at Rossier Career Services. Just a quick reminder, please turn on your cameras if you are in a space to do so, particularly when we move into the Q&A portion of the program. It would be great to be able to see you all. Feel free to add questions to the chat or raise your hands.
Thank you, Isabel. Appreciate that. And now, Dr. Jeff Gold began his career as a bilingual public school teacher in San Diego and has over 25 years of higher education experience in both the public and private sectors. Prior to forming Insights to Action, Jeff served as the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Student Success at the California State University Chancellor's Office, the largest and most diverse higher education system in the nation. In this role, Jeff led the Career Initiative 2025, the CSU's signature strategic effort to facilitate the path to a high-quality college degree for an additional 500,000 students. Jeff holds a bachelor's from the University of California, San Diego, an MBA from Escuela de Negocios Las Palmas, and an EDD in Educational Change and Leadership from the University of Southern California, Rossier. Fight on. Widely, Jeff is known for his development of the nationally acclaimed Student Success Dashboard, a cutting-edge visualization tool that democratizes data and empowers faculty, staff, and administrators to better understand the impact on student success and equity. In partnership with CSU, Jeff scaled the dashboard's adoption across 29 universities and was awarded a patent by the U.S. Patent and Trade Office. Welcome, Dr. Jeff Gold. It is an absolute pleasure to have you join us to kick off the Career Pivot series. As we get started, I invite you to share a little bit about your own career journey, which does not follow a typical career trajectory, if such a thing exists. Also to share insights on making the decision to leave the Chancellor's office and start your own business. And we'd all love to hear more about Insights to Action and other projects that you're engaged with as well. But as we start, am I right in assuming that the Student Success Dashboard helped to springboard this venture with Insights to Action?
It did, yes, and I'll get to that. Thank you, Ryan. So good to see you, and welcome, everyone. Thanks for turning on your cameras. I do so much better when I can see faces, so appreciate you doing that. And maybe just a starting point, I think I'll go through chronologically, hopefully pretty quickly, but I often get asked, why did you go into education? And for me, I'm not one of those I'm not one of those who in third grade, when they went around the room, raised my hand and said, I think when I grow up, I'm going to be an assistant vice chancellor and build dashboards for education. Quite the contrary, I like so many things I still do that I would be hard pressed then as I am now to say, what do I want to be when I grow up? So it's just the path I followed. The way I got started, maybe I'll start my journey, was as an undergraduate at UC San Diego down south. When I went to college years ago, and I'm looking, there's some pretty young folks on this call, so spare me because education was a lot cheaper then, but kind of had this deal with my parents where they were in a position to pay for about half of the cost of college, and I was going to pay for the other half. And so that meant every year I would get a job. And anything above half the cost, I would be able to keep for myself and have fun with, and anything else would go to tuition and books and everything else. So every year I had a job, and I didn't think much of it. I was a political science major, again, liked everything, had different jobs every year. There was no pattern there. my senior year, I went to the Career Center, and I got to be clear, again, I'm dating myself here because we're all friends, but when you go to the Career Center back in the day, you actually go to a building, right? There wasn't the internet to go look at jobs, and you're actually going to bulletin boards with listings of jobs that were printed out, right? And I don't know if you've seen this maybe on the sidewalk or whatever, but they're actually bulletin boards, and they have these little pieces of paper where you take the phone number if you were interested, right? So I'd have these numbers in my pocket with people's job postings, and I call them and say, hey, I'm interested, and they would tell me how to apply. So one of those jobs, now that you know pretty much how old I am, right? Again, we're all friends, but one of those jobs was for a writing instructor position at a high school, at a local high school. And I applied to it. I thought it was pretty interesting, got the job, and turns out I loved it. I was 20, 21 at the time, and the students were seniors, so they were 17. I felt I had this connection with them. I felt their writing really improved. There was this, it was just a kind of a magical experience for me that I didn't expect. And so that led me to immediately decide, I hadn't really given my career much thought at all. I think I want to be a teacher. Now, I didn't think I wanted to be a teacher for life, but I knew that at least for the next little while, I wanted to be a teacher. So I went and got my teaching credential, bilingual teaching credential. I spoke Spanish. And then I began to teach. I got just a great job in Solana Beach, if you folks know where that is, in the San Diego area. And what was so special about the school and the program was my school was one of the only two-way bilingual immersion programs. And what that really means is in the morning, we would do Spanish, only Spanish, all subjects in Spanish. In the afternoon, we do English. And my class was almost a perfect mix of half were native English speakers, half were native Spanish speakers. And so the beauty of the program is not only did it instill in me, or just not instill, but really reinforce the love of education, but I really got to see equity in action, because you would see, just to give you an example, right? You would see students who spoke Spanish for a living and were for their lives, and were maybe nervous about speaking English. In the morning, they would have, when we were doing Spanish only, they would have an English speaker come to them, and they couldn't speak Spanish, but they couldn't speak in English. They would say to them in Spanish, "Como se dice shoes" in Spanish, like something that basic. And you could see the self-esteem of someone, you have, one of their peers who doesn't speak Spanish asking them as a guide for how to say something pretty basic. And they were the experts. So you talk about that in the context of the curriculum as well, not just basic subjects. It was a really powerful experience. And so I felt really grounded in it and loved it. But at the same time, true to what I told you before, I knew I didn't want to be a teacher for my whole career. I just knew that I wanted to do other things. And so after 3 years of teaching, I applied for a grant and got it, a scholarship. And the scholarship was an international scholarship that had me go to Spain, which was amazing. And I lived in Spain, and I got my MBA in Spain, which just opened up more windows and more doors. And so maybe the theme so far is, unlike other people that you're here in this series, I really didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. And even after I put in the time to become a teacher, got my teaching credential, and taught for a few years and loved it, I still didn't have this feeling like this was where I wanted to be 20, 30 years from now. And it had nothing to do with how much I loved it. I absolutely loved being in the classroom. But so I went, I took a break, and that was really hard to do. I felt like I needed to do it, but it was hard because there was a lot of pressure to stay. I had people whose siblings were coming next, and it was a tight-knit community at the time, and so that was a tough decision. But so I went to Spain. It was easy once I got the scholarship to say that this is what I'm going to do. I went to Spain, came back. When I came back, I again wasn't exactly sure what I wanted to do. The economy wasn't great, so I looked around for jobs. And I think at this point there was the internet, right? So I didn't have to go to the job board. But I applied for a job at a company called Univision, or Univision, which is the big Spanish TV and media conglomerate. And the job, believe it or not, was for an accounting position, which I wasn't really that interested in, but I had just got my MBA and the Spanish part. So kind of going on a segue here. It's kind of a funny story that I haven't told in a while. I haven't thought about it in a while. So I go for this interview, right? And I'm dressed in a suit for one of the first times. And I go in, and there's this fancy accountant with a suit. And we have this conversation for a little while. He's asking me questions. And then he says, "I hope you don't mind, I'm going to give you an accounting test." And I said, "Sure. Yeah. I mean, I had taken accounting, no problem." And I did the test, and I immediately realized I had a problem, which is I had taken all of my classes in Spain in Spanish. So I got my MBA in Spanish. I understood the English words, but there were accounts, technical accounts in Spanish that I didn't know exactly how to translate. I'll give you an example. I still remember it. This is a long time ago. I still remember it to this date, but the activity was this ledger activity where they're telling you, okay, you own a store, and so, people are coming in, they're buying things. You have to put, things on the credit side and the debit side. And so one of the scenarios was this guy comes in and writes you a check, and you think it might be a bad check. How do you account for that in your ledger? And so I'm remembering that, in Spanish, there's an account called the account for people where it's doubtful that they'll ever pay you back. I mean, it's got this really long, unwieldy, I know that's not right in English, but for the life of me, I can't. I subsequently think there's something called the allowance for doubtful I don't even remember what it is in English, but I didn't know. So I just wrote that whole long sentence down, and I did that for a few of them. And so the accountant comes back, he takes one look at my exam, and he just starts cracking up. He's looking at me laughing like, you clearly understand accounting. This is all right, but where in the heck did you learn your accounting? This is, I've never seen anything like this. So long story short is, the little philosophy that maybe everything happens for a reason. I wouldn't have lasted there. I did not get the job. But I did take several jobs after that had me traveling and going into the field of education technology. Right before I went to the California State University, in fact, I worked for a company called EduPrize that was based on the East Coast that did consulting with different universities across the nation. At that time, e-learning was just coming up and becoming big, so we were building courses and partnering. But one of my clients was the California State University. That worked out really well. After a couple of years, I got tired of traveling, so I went over to the CSU. And my job at the time was the director of academic technology. Again, a different hat I was wearing. But I'll tell you something at the time that I think is pretty important now that I think back on it. I wasn't particularly that interested in the academic technology part. I mean, that was fine. But what was really important to me was to be involved at the highest strategic level with the priorities of the CSU. I really wanted to do that, even though I was still fairly young in my career. I wanted to be where the heartbeat of the organization was. And at the time, the way that worked out for me was I got involved intentionally on a project that was brand new. It was a program called the Early Assessment Program that had just come out. And it was a big deal for the CSU because it was the first time that they were partnering with high schools across the state of California to give parents and their students an early indicator of whether or not their students were going to be ready for the CSU. Again, language I don't like now. We've learned a lot to talk about student being ready for college as opposed to the college being ready for the university. But at least at the time, it was a very important way of reaching across the intersegmental divide between high school and the university to say, hey, we want to tell you ahead of time, give you some indication about how to help your students succeed in college. And so I bring this up because I always tried in my career at the CSU to be as close to the heartbeat of the organization, the strategic mission of the organization as possible. And how that manifested itself with this project was I became, even though my job was to build a website to help publicize this new program, I made it my job to know everything there was and become the system expert in this program, so that when there were conferences or when there were high-level meetings or when the chancellor needed a briefing, they would call me. And that's what I did. And so I began to kind of make a name for myself that way. And then a few years later, there was this strategic plan which called for a renewed and intentional focus on graduation at the CSU, and I was asked to be a part of that. And that kind of launched my career through the CSU for 20 years or so, which I can talk more about later. What I'd like to go to now, just with the remaining few minutes, is the pivot I made, which was a pretty big deal. So just about a year and a half ago, a little less than a year ago, December, I left the CSU, and I made the decision to leave that August. And the reason I decided to leave was because I felt, I haven't shared much about this, but so my work at the CSU was really about student success and equity, and helping the 23 campuses be better stewards of, intentionally supporting students to degree, removing barriers and the such, with a focus on equity as well. And I had gained a lot of experience for leveraging evidence or student data to reflect it back to campus practitioners like faculty, staff, and administrators in very intentional and active ways. And so this work I wanted to scale at the CSU across the nation, but the CSU was not interested in scaling that work. They wanted to keep it more local. So I just decided, I had a conversation with my wife that, it had been a good run, and that, you'll still hear me say we and our when I talk about the California State University and its students, but I decided to leave, and it's for me been a terrific year plus. I've been consulting, and I can tell you a little bit in further follow-up about some of the projects I'm involved with, how I got involved with them. But I'm also building a product that's now in prototype that I hope to be able to get institutions across, higher ed institutions across the nation to start using pretty soon. The idea being, again, that same theory of taking data that we normally just let sit on the shelf and reflecting it back to practitioners, to faculty, staff, and administrators in ways that are actionable, and let them see themselves in the job of promoting equity and helping students attain a life, really a life transforming college degree. So let me stop there, Ryan, for a minute and check in with you. Obviously, a lot of details, and I spent more time intentionally on the beginning of my career, and I'll provide more information on the latter. But I don't know if you want to me to provide more detail, or would like to have folks in the room share a little bit of their stories.
Sure. Well, thank you for that. I'll say initial background. I'll encourage if folks that are attending, if anybody wants to kind of share specific areas that they're most interested or they have questions on, or even you can put in the chat. Because this series is focused on career pivots, what kind of pivots are you thinking about? And so the intent here is that Jeff can adjust his comments to kind of reflect the needs and interests of the group. Just understanding some of those principles of change, I think, is important. But it also provides an opportunity for you all to connect with one another. Because what we know is, as knowledge is power. And with that power comes an opportunity to consider, like, where am I at and what are my additional choices? So, if you're thinking about a career pivot, and I'm assuming many of you are, my first message is you're not alone. And it's okay to be thinking through that and to be pondering it. You've got to make decisions on your own, but consult with peers, consult with mentors, consult with your fellow Trojans. And so that's the overarching hope with this series. And again, thank you to Jeff for kicking us off. I think that notion of starting your own business and doing consulting is one of the natural places we often think about as a way to manage those pivots. And so I think it's a good initial concept. So with that, I'll open it up. If anybody wants to kind of share what they're thinking about from their own personal perspectives, and again, I encourage you to put it in the chat. So anybody interested in sharing? Oh, thank you, Stella, for putting some comments up. So currently looking at higher education, but specifically into consulting work, learning and development consulting. Thank you. Appreciate that. Other folks? First step is naming it. So got to keep that in mind. And even if you're
Hi.
unsure, put things up. Yes.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Serena. I just wanted to add to what Stella said that I also work in higher education, but I'm, always curious to see what other opportunities are out there with my education and experience in higher ed. So that's what drew me to this session, is just learning more.
Great. Thank you so much. Anybody else willing to or interested in sharing? Okay. Feel free to put additional comments in the chat. Jeff, I've got some additional questions to ask. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that step into consulting and your kind of decision, what you set up in the lead to be able to make that choice?
Yeah, so a little context for me, I'm very fortunate, right? So I have a wife who works, and so so there's I'm going to tell you my story, but we all have different constraints, right? Like you just because you want to leave something, or there's so many different aspects to think about. All the decisions I made weren't just me following my heart. It was kind of a careful set of steps that, the timing was right for me. But so this is a year ago, August. So a few things, and still I'm thinking of your comment too, and Serena and others who are thinking of a pivot. The pivot was unlike other pivots. I think you heard in my story that I was used to pivoting early in my career. That was a long time ago. I mean, when I was in my 20s, I held jobs for 1 or 2 years, and that's about it. And I'd hop around, even teaching for 2.5 years, right? That was normal to me. And I was looking. I never expected to spend more than 2 or 3 years at the California State University. I really didn't. I was shocked, and I'm the most shocked by my tenure there. I just loved it. I mean, every year was different, and I was growing at the same time, and so it was a surprise to me. But I think that then going to a position where I was going to leave was a lot more difficult than had it been many years ago. It's comfortable, right? And there's few places that have pensions. I even in bad times, I never worried about my job. I was always challenged. I mean, there were so many pluses. But I'll tell you what it came down to me, and then I'll tell you some of the details. For me, first of all, again, I'm in a place of privilege. I was able to do this with my family's support. We can't all do it, right? But what it really came down to at the end, in addition to that support, was I had built a body of work at the CSU with an amazing team that I really felt could have impact for students in terms of helping them graduate and helping promote equity way beyond the CSU. So even the CSU is 500,000 students and the largest and most diverse system. There's millions of students across the US. And I just really felt that we all have gifts. I haven't been able to follow all the chat, but still I saw your first comment there. Learning development. We all have specific areas that we get into, and we have skills and talents in those areas that in some cases are really honed after all the years. So for me, my skill that was really honed was I don't think there's that many people in the education sector that really understand the intersection of data, evidence, equity, and student success like I do and like my team does. And so I really felt like I wanted to, after 18 years, take that beyond. I felt like another way to put it, I mean, this is kind of a weird way to put it, but I kind of felt like I could retire in several years from the CSU a happy and comfortable guy. But I also felt that I would always look back and wonder, what if I had taken the risk of leaving and trying something different? And I knew that I would never know the answer to that question for the rest of my life. And knowing that I was in a place of privilege to be able to make that choice, and I had my family's support, it made it not a difficult decision. I mean, it's always uncomfortable. There was a lot of discomfort there. So that's one piece. The other thing, and again, I'm going to try to read the chat in a minute, but still I'm thinking of your comments and Serena, your comment. One of the most important decisions I made was that I gave early notice. I gave notice in August and I didn't leave till December. And one of the reasons that was so important is there's a couple things here, and I'm going to just be really honest. One is I was able to craft my own message carefully about my exit with the CSU leadership. And the reason that's important is because most of the time when a senior leader like Lee leaves, it's because they're asked to leave. That is really true, especially as you get closer. It's not true if I would have left in my 20s, but when you leave and you're a little bit older and you've been there for a while, people are going to wonder, well, like, why is this guy leaving? What did he do? Or are they asking him to leave? What's going on? And so I wanted to make sure, because I was really leaving because I was ready to leave. And so I wanted to make sure that message I was able to carry, and the extra time allowed me to do that. But even more importantly, for my future success, I used those 4 months to really begin networking outside of my work hours. And to be frank, it's a hard truth. People took my call a lot easier and quicker when I was the Assistant Vice Chancellor than they will now, right? There's this perceived power, or there is some power there, right? But I also had relationships so that I would meet with the presidents, the provosts, the vice presidents of student affairs. I can go on and on with the different constituents, faculty leaders that we would meet with regularly, and I had developed a lot of relationships. And so I took September, October, November, to write emails to them and say, hey, I don't know if you heard the news. This is what's going on. If you'd like to talk further about it, I'd love to have a conversation. And that positioned me so that when the time came, I had already had 20, 30, 40 conversations. One other thought there, that just because I thought this was really funny, maybe this is true for everyone, but almost every one of those conversations, I'm not lying. This is really funny to me. As I'm recalling those, hey, I'm leaving conversations, they were all amazing. And everyone was so supportive. And I was convinced after each one that each person I talked to was going to be a client, because they would say stuff like, oh man, like Jeff, your work's so brilliant. Just let me know when January comes. I want to have another conversation. I'm excited to do this or that. And maybe they believed it or maybe they were blowing smoke, but I kind of left feeling like, man, this is great. Right. And then January came, and what I found was things were slow in January. I did find several jobs in like consulting work in February. But what I found really interesting was that I did not see a correlation between the quality of the relationship with the person, the quality of the call that we had, and then whether or not I got a job from them. So the jobs that I ended up getting, I'll just give you an example. One of the jobs I have now that I've been really busy with, it's been incredibly fulfilling, but I had no contact there, was the California Cradle to Career system. So I don't know if folks are aware of it, but there is a relatively new longitudinal data system that's part of the California state government called the Cradle to Career, C2C. And it just so happens that over the last 3 years, they've been doing all the things that, frankly, I'm not that interested in, but they're critical, setting up the legal components and all of the network architecture, and collecting data so that they're able to actually merge data sets that have never been merged together to show new realities. So, for example, there is K-12 data being married with higher ed data, with financial aid data, with career data, with DMV data, with health data, to show things that, for example, which elementary schools in the Central Valley are sending the most students to college, and which of them are getting the best jobs, right? Things that we have never been able to see before are finally we're able to see. So it just so happened, so much of this is like dating, it's a numbers game. You put your name out there, you let people know, hopefully you have some reputation. But a lot of times, at least in my experience, the kind of the dates that you think you'll probably land, or the meetings that go really well, don't necessarily produce fruit. And then the ones where you don't really have an in, someone tells someone that tells someone that this guy might be able to help you, and then voila, there's a relationship there. So no one asked for it, but maybe I would say, if you are comfortable in the position you're in and you're contemplating a move, unless things are really bad, and all of our situations are different, the more you could be mindful and planful and give yourself a lot of runway to be strategic about what you want to do next and cultivate those relationships, the better. Because at least for me, when I left the CSU, it became harder to call up, not my immediate network of people that, that didn't happen, but certainly the people that I didn't see that often. I'm less likely a year out now to call up someone that I would only see once a year and say, hey, let's have a conversation. Whereas it was really easy to do when I was still working there.
Appreciate that, Jeff, and I'll kind of equate that to students that are in their programs too. And I encourage students that are contemplating that pivot, to start that work early. And so we provide the message of don't forget career prep, because I've had so many conversations with alums, I wanted to finish my classes and now I want to think about this. And that first step is oftentimes networking. And so it's getting to know people in that new space. And so if it's fine if you want to finish your classes and then start thinking about it, but it's going to take time. It's going to take months of reaching out to people, deciding who you're going to reach out, kind of thinking the strategy to actually then yield more meaningful conversations. And similar to your comments, as a student, you have certain leverage, especially I'll say our doctoral students. If you're studying something that relates to the consulting area that you want to go into, talk to people as a student, and doors can sometimes open a little bit easier saying, oh, I'm a doctoral student, I'm thinking about this, or even folks that you're doing your research with. I mean, that there are those opportunities. So again, spending some time on the front end is oftentimes very helpful, because it takes time to prepare for that pivot.
Yeah, and I just had a chance to read through a lot of the comments. Man, a lot of risk takers here. I mean, I'd love to hear, you know, this is great. And what's pretty different for me is I took a position, like I'm doing pretty similar things, which I can talk about more now that I did. I mean, I just kind of moved away and I'm doing my own thing for me now and for, but it looks like I'm seeing, is it Bavini and Arnold and Juan, you're making pretty significant right turns and left turns, which I find fascinating. So I'd love if one of you would be willing to talk a little bit about that. I could probably learn from you, and maybe the whole room could learn from you. I'd love to hear it.
Hi, I'm Bavini. Uh, yeah, I mean, I definitely took a right turn, but I wanted to come to this too because hearing your story, I I I feel like now being on the other side of being in the K-12 system for 20 years, and I'm on the flip side of it, learning and hearing from people who have made a career pivot and left that system where, it's kind of like you stay in until the end and you earn your pension and you retire here and all of that, right? I just thought something different for myself and for no reason, just like yourself, not that I hated it, nothing. I loved it all, but 20 years was 20 years and I felt like something else was on the horizon for me. And, just experiencing some, personal stressors and burnout and all of that, I pivoted to helping principals not experience like a similar fate as me and feeling extra burnt out and helping them focus on setting boundaries and all that kind of stuff. So that's just something specifically I chose because of my experience. So I can help others in a similar position. But what I'm finding on the flip side is, when you're in K-12 education, it's a clear line to the next job, to the next, to the next, to the next, right? And now you're here and you're like, okay, who can I learn from? What can I do? I'm open to other, ideas. And even like you mentioned consulting and and a couple of people in the chat have mentioned consulting and, there's a difference between coaching and consulting and I'm learning all of that, right? So, going from being an expert in your field for 20 years, you've earned that because you put in the hours, right? To being the total newbie. And I think that that's the part of the pivot that is very, it's something I have to learn to navigate.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Absolutely. Others? Well, while you're thinking, and Stella, I think you were about to jump in. Just a quick comment on that, Bavini, that I was thinking of is one of the things that was interesting for me in the first month or two was I had to really think through my business model more. So I'll give you an example of what I mean, and I think it relates to what you're talking about, which is you could do coaching as a consultant, or you could make it as, you have sessions and you almost like a gym membership. Like I'm selling you and you can come or you don't come, but I'm going to charge. Like there's all sorts of ways you can package your services and it makes a difference. And it not only makes a difference between with how you're perceived by the client and how seriously they take it, but for you and your stability. The difference between knowing that month to month you may not get the next contract versus I'm signing a 6 month or a year or whatever can make you talked about well-being, can make a big difference in how you're viewing the work. And so there's just a lot of decisions that you never even cross your plate or when you're a high school principal or another career.
That is very helpful, just hearing that from you. Thank you.
Sure.
And I'll say, I mean, a big piece of this is just talking to other folks. And we've had consulting workshop last year. So that's posted on our website, and we'll have more conversations about that because a lot of our students are interested and alumni are interested in that. And whether it's a business, which again is a different approach than an add-on strategy or short-term add-on, and then consider. Those are all kind of possible ways to certainly approach it. I want to point out, Jeff, one of the comments that you made was when you joined the CSU, you wanted to be involved at the highest strategic level, and were less concerned of the actual job. And I see a lot of your decisions kind of revolving around this mission orientation of impact. I want to make the biggest impact that I can, and that was what I'm hearing from you was that was part of the calculus in deciding to start Insights to Action. Is, you know, the CSU, as big as it wasn't as big as it possibly could be. So just an acknowledgement of that kind of mission-centered approach. Is that something you've reflected on throughout your career? I don't know.
Yeah,
Just
good question. And I think, yes, it's always been important to me, but to keep it real for a minute, you know, it's all relative. Like, let me give you a story I'm thinking about right away. So January comes, right? And I'm filled with about 95% excitement and 5%, oh my goodness, right? Did I make the right decision? But by and large, I'm feeling great. But now it's time to see what's going to happen, right? And I have a few leads that I think are going to land. Well, I get this email from a colleague who's a provost at a very small HBCU who said, Jeff, just heard you're consulting. I got this great project. Turns out, and I know there's a couple higher ed people here, so you'll understand this. The project is to come up with a space utilization plan for his campus, which is something that I could not be less interested in. I mean, it's important, don't get me wrong, and I could do it, right? I could probably figure it out. But I'm thinking, so I had this dilemma. I mean, to your point, Ryan, I'm not really interested in doing that, but I'm now my own boss and I got to bring home some money, right? And so the question is, do I say no? Do I say yes and just do it? What do I do? What do I do? So I ended up saying, hey, let's have a conversation. And I was just very honest and said, I'd be happy to do it. If you need me to, here's the kind of things I'm looking to do. If you need me, then I'll sign me up. But I said, quite honestly, there are probably, several hundred people who could do this job who have more expertise than me, do it quicker and better. And so I let that business go. And I'm happy, I think that's the other lesson here is that it's easy when you're working at the CSU and you're fairly secure, or you're working at a high school or a university or wherever folks are, to say, hey, I want to be close to the mission, and that's where I'm going to put my focus and do everything you can to get there. It's another thing when you start your own business to say, for example, here's the exact type of client I want to do or the type of work I want to do. Especially in the beginning, I think you have to be very cognizant of those trade-offs. And I'll tell you, I think that the important thing is just to be reflective on it. And when you're not signing multi-year deals, it's okay to make mistakes. I mean, out of all my consulting gigs, there's one or two which I don't necessarily want to do again, right? Because they're not fun for me. They're not as rewarding. I don't think I'm great at them, and they're not where I want to be 6 months or a year from now. But I was either unsure at the time, or really was doing someone a favor, or needed them to do me a favor. So I guess the long-winded answer to your question is I've always been pretty strategic and always been in tune with where I want to be. But that doesn't mean that that's always the guy. In the short term, I deviate off that path and hopefully learn from it. I don't have to stray too far from it to know that I'm not where my heart is. And if I can afford to get back to that place, then I always try to do that.
Thank you for that. And I think it's important to know. And I think some folks struggle with that decision, and oftentimes, especially folks that are starting consulting, spread themselves too thin, or don't define it well enough on the front end. And that makes it harder to find a good place in the marketplace and really give that elevator pitch. The flip side too is you develop a relationship with somebody and they're like, oh, well, we have this other project, and that can open potentially new doors if you welcome that, and if it makes sense. Because sometimes you might have a great client that you just enjoy working with. I know the setup, I can do this faster because I've got experience working with them.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think, there's some parallels. Early in my career, I was spraying my experience. I didn't tell you all the jobs. I had a job washing airplanes, so I was all over the place with really cool jobs that, parking cars that had nothing to do. And I didn't care about them strategically aligning. But I think as you go down your career, and most of you are at a place where you narrow, right? So then to go back to where you're working for yourself, I think you have to open it up again. You open up that focus because you need to survive and you need to discover, kind of a little bit about what your business model is. One piece for me is that another thing that happened when I started was I thought, there were a couple opportunities of clients I was working with where they needed other staff. So I had to make the decision, do I, in a sense, want to start to hire people to work for, to work for me as kind of subcontractors or as employees for this other company? And it was really tough because, yeah, I mean, there's kind of, look, from a purely, even if the projects, I wasn't that interested in them, the idea of me taking home, $10 an hour for someone who, or whatever, a percentage of the income for just managing people, which comes naturally to me, is pretty attractive. But at the end of the day, that's just not, I love people, I love managing people, but I love managing people if I have the choice towards projects that are mission driven and meaningful. And so I think that for the people that are contemplating a career change, I think, this is all probably sounding a little overwhelming because you're still in your jobs in many cases, and you're still trying to figure out which way you want to go. But when you take that path, I think we should prepare for a lot of different things to come at you. And you'll have to make decisions about whether they make sense. And, I would just say, give yourself grace that most of the decisions you can come back from. I mean, they're not long, they won't define you. And but it is interesting because obviously when I was at the CSU, every day I decide what projects I want to work on or not, or pursue, but it was different. I mean, it's very different when you're working for yourself than it is when you're working for, a large institution like many of you are.
Great. Appreciate that. We've got time for a few more questions, and I'll encourage the group. And actually, Susan just posted. Can you talk a little bit more about the pros and cons of being a sole practitioner?
Sure. So, look, what things? So let me start with the pros. There's so many of them. There's so much. Ryan and I were talking about this just before the call. There's so much noise out there. It is such a difficult time in the world, and I think in particular in higher ed. My heart goes out to all of you. It is. I mean, it's really tough. And my colleagues at the CSU, times have gotten really tough there since I left. I mean, there's always difficulties, but there's just such pandemonium in the world and uncertainty and things flying at you. And people are in reaction mode. I mean, there's no time right now for let's think of where we might want to be in 6 months, or what's the most transformative thing we could do. There's none of that. I mean, it's more what can we do to get through the day or help these students, not leave or whatever it is. And so it's a weird way, Susan, to get to the pro, but the pro is that I'm certainly not insulated from all the crap that's going on, but from not being at an institution, I'm free to focus on the things I want to focus on. I'm going to take us on a segue just for a minute, and I will get back to your question, but I had a really fascinating conversation a month ago. A month ago, I had a conversation with a colleague that I've known for years. He works he's a very high level, like the #2 guy at the coordinating board for Texas, the Texas Higher Ed Coordinating Board. So all of the universities in Texas, it's kind of their master coordinating board. And I was talking to him about my work, and he said, Jeff, I love you, but you can't even use the word equity. We can't hire, like if it's on your website, if it's in your product, like forget it, we'll get sued. It's like, and so, Susan, to answer your question, that's one part of it. It's kind of a weird way to answer your question because I'm talking about all the negative to get to the positive, but it was positive because I could tell him to heck with that. I now have a decision to make about how to market my services, but I could decide, look, I'll either tone down the language, I'm not changing the mission and the focus, or I won't do business in Texas, or I won't do that, So, but I guess the freedom to make every choice strategically as they come up, without the bureaucracy, as much as I love the CSU, and I do, hiring someone would take months, and would take, and that's, and all the rules, if I need to hire someone, right, I have a group of people that I've worked with over the years that I'm already talking to about, hey, if the time comes and if my revenue's in the right place, you're on my list. I'm not going to interview them. I mean, I worked with them. I hired them before. I know them. I'm going to hire them in less than a day. So the ability to make decisions quickly, to pivot on a dime, it's all. And the other thing is, for me, I really realized something that I more clearly that I've always known about myself is that I like so many things, like you heard me say, but I love to build. I mean, so one of the things I've done over the year, in addition to the consulting, is I built a product, a student success dashboard product that took a long time. I had I paid a consulting firm in Chicago to help me do it. But it has been so rewarding, and it's just in prototype now. Who knows if it's going to sell? I hope it will, so I could build more. But my happiest times are building. I mean, I'm doing the consulting with Cradle to Career, and I'm doing some other projects. But you know, the ability to just set your own agenda too, the ability to fail, you know, understand your failure and pivot is also something that's been great. So all those are pros. Clearly, you know, the top of the list con is I had things pretty laid out for me. So I don't know, Susan. I think you put a post in the chat. Tell me, where are you right now? What job?
Actually, I recently retired from a large corporation.
Oh, wonderful. Congratulations. Yeah. So, well, for me, you know, I was going to say, you know, for me, I had one of the rare people who had a pension. And not only did I have a pension at the CSU lined up for me through CalPERS, they had this little chart which shows you that you keep going down, like it's years and like, I forget what it is. It's like the number of years you have and then the number, whatever it is, right? But you're always going down, down, down. Oh, years and age, right? So number of years and age, and it brings you down at this angle, and it all culminates in this percentage of your total salary that you're going to take home for the rest of your life. Like I was incredulous. I never signed up for the CSU really knowing about this when I was younger, or thinking that I would ever, like, I didn't care. I was going to leave way before then, right? But so the trade-off is clear. When I look at that list and I say, man, if I stay another 12 or 15 years, I could get 75% of my salary, which is going to go up for the rest of my life. Like I could go sit on a beach and someone's going to write me a check for 3/4. Like, are you kidding me? Like, why in the heck would I leave, right? And that's why people stay. So, you know, they're even in the chaos and the turmoil that's happening, not only at the CSU, but around the nation, and maybe at your company too, where you just retired from, the path to retirement was predictable and comfortable. And so the biggest con now is, you know, not having that to rely on. But I'm also built a little bit differently. I mean, my biggest worry about letting that go was my family more than me. I've always been a bet on yourself, you know, and so I think I was much more comfortable with the risk, but it wasn't just about me. So that's still, you know, it's not something that's been on my mind for a while, but in the first few months, it was on my mind. Like when I talked about that 95% super excited, 5%, what the heck have I done? Part of that 5%, what have I done, was, you know, I'm leaving something that's pretty solid that, you know, and in fact, just last thing I'll say on that, my parents, as you can probably imagine, are pretty old school, and it took probably about 4 conversations. I mean, they love me and they support me, but I don't think they really got it until I actually started landing a few clients. Like, I think they really thought I messed up, which is, you know, understandable. But yeah, I mean, at this point, there's, for me, almost all upside. The last thing I'll say on this is, you know, I talk of being game and things are going well, but there's also this sense always in the back of my mind, maybe that 5% hasn't left, that the state of the economy, or the state's economy, I should say, is bad. And most of my contacts are California contacts. And I have a couple of great clients, but I haven't been doing much marketing because I'm plenty busy. And it is very possible that, well, hopefully Ryan might invite me back one day. And it's possible that I would share the story about how things were going great and then they turned. And I, you know, wasn't making enough money to support my family, so I went and got a different job. I hope I don't see that, but it is not something I ever thought about at the CSU. And it's not something I spent a lot of time thinking about, but I think it is a possibility in a way that it wasn't before.
Appreciate you sharing that. And I will say, higher ed management, not always secure as we think it is. I mean, there's potential downsides with that. I mean, we're in a unionized state with public higher education, and there is increasing risk, and it just depends. But I wanted to ask another question. So, you know, as you talk about this experience, what role have mentors played in managing these pivots and just navigating your career in general?
Yeah, you know, this one I almost hesitate to answer because I feel like I might be giving bad advice, because I think this is a weird thing about me. But I've always learned a lot more from negative influences than mentors. So I could tell you clearly, I won't name their names and I probably won't tell stories. Well, maybe I'll mention one at a high level. It's so long ago, but you remember I mentioned my first real job or first job out of college was that teaching assistant, the writing instructor job in San Diego. Well, what I didn't tell you was that teacher, that English teacher was really bad. And that's part of why I wanted education, why I wanted to be a teacher. I saw these students and incredibly diverse, and they were seniors, so they had whatever, seniors, right, in high school, but they still were there, wanting to learn, wanting to become better writers, and the teacher would often turn his back and be dismissive, and I just I learned a lot from that teacher in ways that I think the way I'm programmed is I've had bosses too that they've talked to their employees or talked to me in ways that I wouldn't imagine, and the damage that they have done and I have seen from an interpersonal level, and morale is devastating. And so probably not the answer, and maybe not even the best way to talk about it, because I mean, I certainly have mentors, and I can talk about that for a second. But when I think about lessons learned and guidance, I often rely more on the negative as a way of spinning it around. Not, boy, I don't want to, like, don't ever let me be like that. Or if I'm like that, you have to tell me. If I do anything that approaches that outcome, please let me know. But on the flip side, I would say mentors, I maybe haven't had typical mentors, but I have a small group of people. One of them, I'll give you an example. My oldest brother lives in DC. He's a lawyer and he has run nonprofits. And so especially as I've transitioned, I'll tell you one more thing real quick. I don't know, it just makes me laugh. But in the beginning, this is against my older brother's advice. He was like, okay, buy a license for QuickBooks. Like, he wanted me to buy your Zoom license, buy all these things. And I'm very like, no, like, I want to wait till I get a client. And then like, I want to wait till I'm actually like, but so he's always given me advice about running a business because he knows that. And I still take his advice, but I'm very guarded in a way. But I'll just say that it's great to have guidance from people that are in different industries. I find that to be really critical. Not that there's not a lot of power in higher ed, but I think there's so many walked and lived experiences. There's such a diversity of not only kind of work experiences, but life experiences, that the more that you're able to draw from that, kind of the richer your guidance will be in making the right decision.
Great. Well, and I like the negative leader example. I mean, sometimes that's what it takes to propel us through the risk, like change is hard, or looking for that new position, or deciding if you want to step up, but a frustration with somebody of like, I can do better than that, or this community deserves, a better leader or something along those lines. So that's great. How has your Rossier education prepared you for your leadership roles and the things that you've done?
Yeah, good question. I think a couple ways. One has been the network, which is terrific. The people in my program that we became very close. We were all working professionals, but there was a lot of camaraderie around studying and working together, and that's continued with some of them, which is really nice. I'd also say this is maybe not again, I know where this is being recorded. But for me, where I was in my career, a lot of me getting my doctorate was because I was in a very hierarchical, traditional field that, I was getting plenty of respect for because I had a nice title, but I needed to have a doctorate to really fill it, to be able to have the type of authority, and to move on in my career. Now, at the time, I was kind of resistant to the idea to going to get the doctorate at USC because I thought I was on the path to retire. I was still happy. I hadn't really come to this juncture yet. And I just figured I'm probably, like, I never would have thought this, but I'm probably going to retire from the CSU. So why, again, it's maybe very short-sighted and not what you'd want to see in a Rossier marketing brochure, because there was so much more to the degree than just getting the stamp, getting the doctorate. But that was really important in some ways. And I will say that it opened doors that I didn't expect. And the fact that it's USC, Rossier, which is so respected, also helps. So, I think it's a little bit different too. I think I attended the program a lot later in my career than some. And I think younger in your career, it maybe had the, if you would have asked me, if I would have gotten my doctorate 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and you would have asked me this question, I'm sure I would have mentioned more about the curriculum, but at least for now, at least the day-to-day job experiences were at least as rich as the, kind of the curriculum in some way. But yeah, it was all terrific, really all terrific, and all helped to where I am now. I mean, it's hard to say how much of an advantage it is for me now in this position, but it certainly adds to, kind of an imprimatur of this guy is genuine, this guy has this doctorate, this guy speaks our language. And unfortunately, I hate to say it, but, higher ed is pretty tribal. And a lot of people will look at your bio and see, do you have a doctorate? And if you don't, they won't want to work with you. So that's been critical.
Right. Well, thank you for that. We're running out of time, and I want to give you an opportunity to share any parting thoughts you have. What advice do you have for people that are exploring it? We had so I want to invite you to do that. I know Arnold posted a question on writing a book. If you've got any thoughts on that, I welcome that comment as well.
Well, so first of all, thank you again for coming. It's great. I wish we had more time and had a little bit more interactive sessions so I could hear more. I'll just say, Arnold, my hat's off to you. I think that's so cool. Like that is much cooler than my story. You should have Arnold on. Like leaving a career to write a book is both crazy and amazing, and I'm jealous, and I want to hear about it. I'm wishing you success. I think that's amazing. I, parting words are, I just want to acknowledge that my privilege and being able to leave when I did. And, times are tough, and maybe you need to spend more time in a career that's not exactly where you want to be to get to where you want to be. I think that's number one. Number two is it's never too early to start networking. I know Ryan and Isabel have resources. I never really thought about that. In fact, I never really thought of my role at the CSU as networking. There were always people that were better at shaking hands and meeting people and making that an intentional aspect, like when I went to conferences, than me. I didn't, it's not that I was antisocial, but I never really cared that much about that. And I think if you're thinking about pivoting, like if I could go back in time, I would have been more intentional specifically the last 2 years before I left, about getting out there and making sure that I'm, networking with people every chance I got. But overall, I just say, look, again, acknowledging my privilege in this. If you're in the process or thinking about making the move, I'm happy to give you any, like we can talk after this. I'm just really cognizant that my experience is not yours. We all come from different places. And so, I would just say it's a kind of a weird, tacky way to end this session, but go with your heart, and be forgiving of making decisions that maybe take you off that path, and then just work like heck to get back on that path when you can.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeff, for being part of this conversation. I think there'll be future opportunities. As I've shared, there's a lot of interest in consulting and other ways of applying our leadership skills and background. And so welcome future opportunities to talk with you all. My closing advice, don't forget that career prep piece, because we're talking about consulting, and I would echo Jeff's comment. It's your journey, but talk to a lot of people. Don't just wait. And we'll have a series. Dr. Eric Mejia was part of this, and he's doing the session on March 10th. So I encourage you to check those out. But many of our faculty here at Rossier do consulting. And so if that's a path or an interest, or doing research or writing, talk to your faculty members, talk to folks that you interact with. Looked on LinkedIn and the things that people are doing. Utilize your Trojan network to have those conversations. But do that, set the habit of doing that. You can decide how much time you could spend on things like this, but make sure you're doing it on a regular basis, because you don't want to reflect 6 months from now and say, okay, now I'm ready for this next step, and then realize, well, the first thing I've got to do is send out communications and develop these relationships. So again, thank you, Jeff, for being part of this conversation. Thank you, everybody, for joining. And I appreciate, Jeff, your interest of making this a dialogue with our participants as well. Isabel, let me invite you up to close us out and provide some reminders.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ryan, and thank you, Jeff. So I just put in the chat the upcoming career services events for the spring. To note, we have our career fair next Friday, February 28th from 1 to 3 at Town and Gown. And then we have 2 more career pivot sessions the first and second week of March. So we hope to see you all there. Thank you so much, everyone.
Cool. Thank you, everybody. Fight on. Appreciate you spending the afternoon with us.
Take care.